$7 million. To my son, it looked like an opportunity. But to me, it was a test. A test that revealed the true hearts of my children. When my husband passed away, he didn't just leave behind memories. He left a trust fund worth $7 million, a legacy meant to bind our family together. At first glance, it seemed like a blessing, a way to secure the future of both our son Mark and our daughter Lily. People said we were a fortunate family, that wealth would protect us from hardship. But I learned that sometimes money doesn't protect, it destroys. In those quiet months after the funeral, I would sit by the window and watch Lily play her father's old piano, while Mark busied himself with phone calls, business ventures, and schemes I could never quite understand. Lily sought comfort in music. Mark sought comfort in control. And then the arguments began. The trust could only be touched if both children agreed. My husband had thought it was the fairest way. But fairness, when mixed with greed, becomes fuel for conflict. I saw the subtle signs Mark's insistence, his raised voice, the shadows in Lily's eyes when she came to sit beside me, whispering that she felt pressured. I kept silent. Not because I was weak, but because I knew something my son did not. My husband had left behind more than money. Hidden deep within the trust was a clause, a secret condition, only a few of us knew. If either child attempted to coerce or threaten the other, their right to the fortune would be erased, and everything would belong to the one who endured. Mark thought he was clever, unstoppable. He thought he could bend his sister's will, but he never realized that every word, every threat, every ounce of his greed was leading him toward the very trap his father had set. $7 million was the bait. But justice? Justice was the net waiting to close. So I stayed quiet. I let him believe I was powerless, that Lily was fragile, that the trust was his to manipulate. And all the while, I waited, because I knew the day would come when silence would no longer be weakness. It would be the sharpest weapon of all. Don't forget to follow Family Stories collection to hear the full story, one of the most unforgettable family revenge stories. My name is Eleanor. I am 72 years old, a widow, and the mother of 2 children who could not be more different from one another. I have lived long enough to see joy loss in the quiet ways that greed can fracture a family. When I speak to you now, it is not just as a mother, but as a witness to the choices that reveal a person's true soul. I was married to Thomas for 45 years. He was a man of vision, a self-made entrepreneur who built his fortune from nothing more than grit and discipline. He loved business the way some men love sport. But he also loved his family. At least that's what I always believed. When he passed away after a sudden heart attack, he left us not only with grief, but with a legacy that would prove to be both blessing and curse, a trust fund worth $7 million. Thomas believed that money should never be handed over without responsibility. He was determined that our children, our son Mark, and our daughter Lily, would learn the value of cooperation. So in his will, he placed a condition: the trust could only be accessed if both children agreed. He thought this would force them to talk, to compromise, to remain close even after his death. What he could not foresee was how differently our 2 children would respond to the lure of wealth. Lily, our youngest, is 34. She has always been gentle, thoughtful, and deeply connected to beauty. Ever since she was a child, she found solace in the piano her father bought for her 12th birthday. While Mark joined his father in boardrooms and investment meetings, Lily stayed home practicing Bach and Chopin until her fingers ached. She never cared about money. For her, security was not measured in dollars, but in the comfort of family, in the warmth of shared memories. Mark, on the other hand, is 42, and as ambitious as his father once was, but without Thomas's patience. From the time he was a teenager, Mark saw money not as security, but as power. He loved the thrill of closing deals, even small ones, and bragging about how much profit he made. He often said, "Dad built something great, but I'll take it further." Wealth isn't just about safety, it's about control. I used to smile, thinking he would mellow with age. But time has a way of sharpening some edges rather than softening them. Before Thomas died, we were a family, imperfect, but whole. We gathered around the dining table every Sunday, Lily's laughter filling the air, while Mark debated politics with his father. The old lemon tree in the backyard bore fruit each summer, and we would make lemonade together, sticky and sweet. In those moments, the money didn't matter. We were simply a family, but death changes things. When Thomas was gone, a silence settled over our house, the kind of silence that makes you hear every creak in the floorboards, in every sigh in your own chest. Lily turned to music for comfort, playing the same Chopin nocturne late into the night. Mark, meanwhile, grew restless. He began asking about the trust almost immediately after the funeral, as though grief were just another obstacle to step over on his way to success. I remember the first conversation we had about it. We were sitting in the living room, the fireplace still cold, though winter had come. Mark leaned forward, his eyes burning with impatience. "Mom, Dad left us the trust. $7 million is too much to just sit there. We need to put it to work. Real estate stocks, maybe even a new business." Lily was sitting beside me, her hands folded in her lap. She shook her head. "It's not about putting money to work. That trust was Dad's way of keeping us together. He wanted us to protect it, not exploit it." Mark's lips tightened. "That's sentimental nonsense, Lily. Money that doesn't grow dies." From that moment on, I knew the trust fund would not bring my children together. It would pull them apart. I tried to remind them of what Thomas had intended. I told them that cooperation was the heart of his gift. But the more I spoke, the more Mark hardened, and the more Lily retreated into silence. The piano became her shield, her way of drowning out arguments that she never had the heart to fight. As a mother, it broke me to see them drifting apart. One child consumed by greed, the other too gentle to defend herself. And in between them stood me carrying the weight of Thomas's final wish. I wanted to honor him, but more than that, I wanted to protect Lily. She reminded me so much of myself when I was young, soft-spoken, eager to keep peace, but too often overlooked. Mark started visiting less frequently, only appearing when he wanted to push the subject of the trust. He brought contracts, proposals, and endless calculations. Lily avoided him when she could, but when they were together, I could see the fear in her eyes. She loved her brother, but she no longer trusted him. In me, I learned to listen more than I spoke. I learned to watch. Every sigh from Lily, every smirk from Mark, every shadow that passed over our home, I knew something was coming, though I did not yet know when. What Mark never realized was that Thomas had prepared for this very moment. My husband, for all his love of business, knew the darkness that greed could awaken. And so before he died, he left behind more than money. He left behind a safeguard, a secret clause buried deep in the trust. I would not reveal it yet. For now, I remained silent. The quiet mother, they both believed, was too fragile to intervene. But inside, I carried Thomas's final weapon, and one day, when the time was right, I would use it, not for myself, but for Lily, and for the memory of the man who trusted me to protect them both. Thomas was a man who rarely spoke without purpose. He had been a businessman all his life, a strategist, a planner, a man who built his fortune not by chance, but by foresight. Even when the doctors warned him that his heart was failing, he did not complain. He simply began to prepare. I remember the last months of his life with painful clarity. He spent long evenings in his study, poring over papers, speaking in low tones, with his old friend and attorney, Richard Park. Mr. Park had been our family's lawyer for more than 30 years, a quiet, steady man who had guided us through real estate purchases, tax filings, and even the drafting of our first wills when the children were young. One night after dinner, Thomas took my hand and led me into that study. The room smelled of leather and oak, with the faint scent of his favorite pipe tobacco still lingering. On the desk lay a thick folder stamped with the words, "Trust Agreement, Eleanor." He said, his voice calm, but edged with the weight of inevitability. "I have made changes to the trust." I sat across from him, my fingers clasping his, as though I could anchor him to this world. "What kind of changes?" I asked softly. "The main fund," $7 million will remain untouched until both our children agree to access it. That part is not new, but I've added something else. Something protective. He opened the folder and showed me a page marked codicil, special provision. His handwriting was neat, precise, as though every word had been etched with determination. Listen carefully, he said. If either child attempts to coerce, threaten, or unduly pressure the other regarding the trust, the entire $7 million will immediately and irrevocably transfer to the sibling who was threatened. No appeals, no negotiations. The words sank into me like a stone dropping into still water. At first, I did not know whether to feel comfort or dread. That's drastic, Thomas, I whispered. He shook his head. No, it is necessary. Money, Eleanor, is not neutral. It can heal, but it can also corrupt. I have seen too many families torn apart by it. I love both our children, but I know them. Mark's hunger for power worries me. Lily's softness makes her vulnerable. This clause is not about punishing one or rewarding the other. It is about revealing the truth when the time comes. He placed his hand over mine. It was warm, though I could feel the tremor of his failing health. I trust you, Eleanor. If the day comes when the family table turns into a battlefield, you must hold this clause close until the right moment. Don't reveal it too soon. Don't warn them. Justice is not something we force. It's something we allow to bloom when the soil is ready. His words carved themselves into my memory. Justice will bloom when the soil is ready. For weeks afterward, I wondered if perhaps he was being overly cautious. We were still a family then. Mark and Lily still came home for Sunday dinners, still laughed, though not as freely as when they were children. Could Thomas truly believe his own son might try to coerce his sister? Could he imagine such betrayal? But Thomas was not a man who speculated lightly. He had spent decades in boardrooms, watching ambition twist men into predators. He had witnessed partners cheat friends, betray, even brothers, turn against each other over profit. If he feared greed would seep into our own bloodline, I could not dismiss his foresight. When Thomas passed, the codicil was sealed within the trust documents known only to Mr. Park and me. I attended the reading of the will, with both children at my side, listening, as the lawyer explained the basic structure of the trust, $7 million held until both siblings agreed. Mark's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Lily, sweet. Lily simply lowered her eyes and said nothing. Neither of them knew the hidden condition. Neither of them knew that their father had planted a quiet seed of justice, waiting to sprout only if darkness ever came. I carried the secret like a stone in my chest. There were days when I longed to tell Lily, to reassure her that her father had not abandoned her to Mark's forceful nature. But Thomas's words echoed in my mind, don't reveal it too soon. Justice must bloom in its season. So I kept silent. Lily continued her quiet life painting in her studio, practicing piano in the afternoons, walking in the garden with me beneath the lemon tree. She never asked about the trust. Money to her was a shadow compared to music, compared to memory. Mark, on the other hand, began circling. At first, he spoke in hypotheticals. Mom, imagine what we could do if the trust were invested. New businesses, new opportunities. 7 million could become 15 in a decade. His eyes gleamed with the hunger of a man who saw the world not in colors or feelings, but in transactions. I listened. I nodded. I said little. Inside, I thought of Thomas's clause. If you ever threaten Mark, the money will slip through your fingers like water. In the quiet of night, I sometimes opened the drawer where I kept the copy Thomas had entrusted to me. The words were stark, almost merciless. Any attempt at coercion voids the equal distribution. The full balance shall be reassigned to the beneficiary who resisted. I wondered how long I would have to hold that secret. Months, years. Or would it never be needed at all? But then I would recall Thomas's steady eyes as he placed his trust in me. Eleanor, he had said, you will know when the moment comes. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Trust that justice once planted will bloom. I folded the paper, returned it to its hiding place, and whispered a silent promise to him. I will wait, Thomas. I will wait until the soil is ready. Neither Mark nor Lily ever suspected. To them, I was simply their aging mother, moving more slowly, speaking more softly. But inside me lived a fire of quiet determination. A mother's silence, after all, is not weakness. Sometimes it is the sharpest blade hidden until the moment it must strike. Mark had always been ambitious, but after Thomas passed, ambition began to rot into desperation. His businesses, which once seemed so promising, were bleeding money. Investments he bragged about at family dinners had collapsed into dust. Partners drifted away, creditors circled like vultures, and for the first time in his adult life, Mark tasted the bitter flavor of failure. At first, he tried to hide it. He still arrived at Sunday dinners in tailored suits, his tie perfectly knotted, his shoes polished until they gleamed. He still spoke with the smooth confidence of a man in control. But behind his eyes, I could see the cracks forming. He no longer laughed as easily. He avoided questions about his ventures. His phone buzzed endlessly, and he excused himself from the table to take calls outside. And then slowly, his mask slipped. "Mom," he said one evening, his voice carefully measured. "It doesn't make sense for the trust to just sit there. $7 million locked away while opportunities are slipping through our fingers. Lily and we could do so much with that money." Lily looked up from her plate, her expression calm, almost detached. "I don't need the money, Mark," she replied softly. "I'm happy with my work, my art, my teaching. The house covers my needs. Dad left us plenty already." Mark forced a smile. "Of course you don't need it. But think of what I could do. I could expand my firm, invest in real estate, start projects that would benefit everyone. You'd have your share more than your share, I promise." Lily shook her head gently. "Dad set up the trust for a reason. He wanted us to agree. I don't agree." That was the first fracture. Over the next weeks, Mark tried again and again. At first, he was all charm. He brought flowers to Lily's studio, complimented her paintings, reminisced about childhood memories. He told her he admired her independence, her quiet strength. He even promised her 60% of the trust if she would just sign. 60%, Lily. You'd be the majority holder. Think about it. You'd never have to worry about bills again. But Lily only smiled sadly. "Mark, it's not about bills. It's about principle. Dad tied this money to both of us. If you want my consent, you need to convince me that your plan honors his legacy. So far, all I hear is what you'll gain." The rejection stung his pride like acid. By the third month, the softness was gone. Mark's tone hardened. His visits to Lily's studio turned sharp, filled with accusations instead of flattery. "You're selfish," he snapped one afternoon, pacing the floor while she continued painting. "Do you know how much pressure I'm under? Do you care at all about this family? Dad left us that money so we could thrive, not so you could sit here playing with brushes while I drown." Lily set down her brush and looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. "Dad left us that money so we wouldn't destroy each other. And right now, you're proving him right." The words pierced him, but instead of reflecting, he grew angrier. He began to show up with friends, loud, aggressive men I had never met before. They lounged in his car outside Lily's apartment, smoking, their presence a silent threat. Once they followed her home from the grocery store, their laughter echoing down the street like a warning. "Sign the papers," Lily Mark hissed one evening, cornering her in the driveway. "It's just ink on paper. You'll get your cut, I'll fix my problems, and we can all move on." Lily's hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I won't sign." I watched all of this unfold from the shadows of my own silence. My heart ached with every confrontation, every insult he hurled at her, every tear she shed in the privacy of her room. There were nights when I nearly broke my promise to Thomas, when I wanted to shout the truth. "Mark, one threat, one act of coercion, and you lose everything." But Thomas's voice came back to me. "Don't reveal it too soon. Justice blooms when the soil is ready." So I waited. Mark's tactics grew harsher. He slipped forged emails under Lily's door messages, pretending to be from the trust administrator, urging her to cooperate for tax benefits. He hired a notary and tried to trick her into signing documents, disguised as routine acknowledgments. But Lily was no fool. She tore the papers to shreds and sent them back through the mail slot. Finally, his desperation spilled into rage. He arrived one night, pounding on the door, his voice thick with fury. "Lily, do you want me to lose everything? Is that what you want? Fine. If I go down, I'll take you with me. You'll regret this." I stood at the top of the stairs, hidden in the dark, my breath shallow, my body trembling. Every instinct screamed at me to intervene to protect my daughter, to stop my son from falling deeper into the abyss. But I clenched the banister and forced myself to stay silent. Because I knew, though Lily did not, that every threat, every attempt at coercion was weaving the noose tighter around Mark's own ambitions. Justice was being written in his own hand with every cruel word he spoke. And when the time was right, Thomas's seed of wisdom would bloom. The weeks after Mark's first threats were the hardest of my life. Not because I feared for myself at 73, I had already faced illness, loss, and the death of the man I loved. No, the hardest part was watching Lily, my gentle daughter, wither under the storm her brother had unleashed. She had always been steady, serene, the kind of woman who painted her feelings instead of shouting them, who watered the garden at dawn because she believed plants, like people, needed soft beginnings. But now that serenity was cracking, at night I would pass by her room and hear her pacing. Sometimes I found her curled in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, as if bracing for a sound at the door. Coffee cups stacked in the sink. Her hands shook when she held them. She stopped painting for the first time in years. "Mom," she whispered to me one morning, her voice fragile, "maybe it would be easier if I just signed." Then Mark would calm down. He'd leave me alone. Maybe peace is worth more than money. I cupped her face in my hands and shook my head. Peace, built on surrender to fear, is not peace, Lily. It's prison. She pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. But I can't take this anymore. Every time the phone rings, I flinch. When someone knocks, I freeze. I don't feel safe in my own home. Mark had made sure of that. He sent her text messages at midnight. "You'll regret this." He left voicemails, his voice rising with frustration, calling her ungrateful, selfish, blind. Twice he came pounding on her door, his words echoing through the walls of the house Thomas had once filled with laughter. I was there both times. I stood in the hallway, pretending not to hear, letting my body slump, as though old age had already stolen my strength. When Mark glanced at me, he saw nothing but a weary widow, too fragile to intervene. That was exactly what I wanted him to see. But inside, I was recording it all. Every outburst, every cruel word, every threat. Not with machines, but with memory. I etched them into my mind, waiting for the day I would place them on the table beside Thomas's hidden claws. The air in our home grew heavy, suffocating. Meals became silent battles. Mark ate quickly, barely glancing at us, his jaw tight with anger. Lily sat stiffly, pushing food around her plate, her shoulders tense as if braced for an explosion. And I played my part. I coughed more often, moved slower, let my hands tremble slightly as I poured tea. To Mark, I was fading irrelevant. To Lily, I was just another helpless soul caught in his storm. But deep inside, a quiet fire burned. There were moments I almost revealed the truth. When Lily sobbed in the garden, whispering she wanted to pack a bag and disappear. When Mark slammed his fist on the kitchen table so hard the dishes rattled. My heart screamed to speak, to tell them both that Thomas had foreseen this, that the trap was already set. But I remembered his words the night he drafted that clause, "Don't rush justice. Let it bloom at the right time." So I bit my tongue. The pressure on Lily mounted until even her dreams betrayed her. She confessed to me one dawn, her eyes red from sleeplessness, that she dreamt of being locked inside a vault, the walls lined with money, and Mark standing outside with the key, laughing as she begged to be free. That morning, I sat with her at the kitchen table and placed her hand over mine. "Lily, your father believed in you. He trusted you to hold the weight of his legacy. That trust is worth more than $7 million. Don't let fear convince you otherwise." She looked at me with trembling lips. But what if Mark snaps, Mom? What if one day he actually hurts me? I swallowed hard, my heart breaking, because I knew her fear wasn't unfounded. Mark's anger had sharpened into something darker. His voice, once persuasive, was now laced with venom. He called her weak, accused her of ruining the family, said she was pushing him to ruin. The way he looked at her, his own sister, was no longer the look of kin, but of a man seeing an obstacle. And yet I waited, because I knew something Mark didn't. Every threat he uttered, every attempt to coerce Lily, was not just cruelty. It was evidence. Evidence that would activate Thomas's safeguard. Evidence that would take the $7 million he craved and hand it entirely to the sister he tormented. The house felt like a battlefield with invisible trenches. Mark stomped through rooms like a general with no soldiers left. Lily drifted like a ghost, clutching her sketchbook, but never opening it. And I, the quiet widow, shuffled between them with bowed head and lowered eyes, hiding the steel inside me. Mark thought I was powerless. He thought Lily was fragile. He thought money made him the master of this family. But he was wrong. So very wrong. And as I watched him pace, rage spilling from his lips, I whispered silently to myself, Mark believes I am weak. But the truth is, I am only waiting for the moment when the trap closes. That evening, the house was thick with tension, as if the very walls knew what was coming. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the storm outside had not yet broken. I sat in my chair, knitting half-heartedly, my eyes lowered, but my ears alert to every sound. Lily sat quietly at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across from her, Mark's eyes blazed with the frustration of a man who believed the world owed him more than it ever would give. Lily, he began, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I've asked nicely. I've explained. I've offered you more than your share. But you keep dragging this out. You think you're doing something noble by refusing me? You're not. You're ruining everything. Lily flinched but didn't answer. I could see her fingers trembling, her lips pressed tight. Mark slammed his hand on the table so hard that the silver spoon rattled and fell onto the floor. His face reddened, his jaw clenched. You don't understand what's at stake. I need that money. I need it now. And if you don't sign, you'll regret it. He leaned across the table, his voice rising to a roar. If you don't sign, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. The words echoed through the house louder than thunder. For a moment, silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Lily's eyes widened with shock, tears spilling down her cheeks, as if her heart had finally broken beyond repair. I sat still, but inside something shifted. Those words, those threats were more than anger. They were the line Thomas had anticipated, the very trigger he had planned for years ago when he told me if they ever turn against each other, if fear and greed replace family, this clause will protect the one who needs it most. Quietly, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, pressing the small recorder I had hidden there. A soft click, barely audible, captured every word Mark had just unleashed. My hands were steady, my voice calm, as I said nothing, just letting the silence stretch long enough to seal his fate. Lily pushed back from the table and ran to her room, sobbing so hard I thought she might collapse. The sound of her door slamming shut pierced the stillness. Mark muttered curses under his breath, pacing like a trapped animal, but I no longer feared him. Because in that instant, I knew the codicil was alive. I rose slowly, each step measured, and walked to Lily's room. My heart ached, seeing her curled on the bed, her shoulders shaking her face, buried in the pillow like a child again. I sat beside her, smoothing her hair, whispering softly, "Shh, my love. Don't let his words break you. Tonight was not a loss. Tonight was the moment we've been waiting for." She lifted her tear-stained face, confusion written in every line. "Mom, what are you talking about? He hates me. He's going to make my life miserable until I give in. I can't do this anymore." I leaned close, my lips brushing her ear, my voice steady, but soft as stone. "Lily, listen to me carefully. Your father was wiser than you ever knew. He left behind something meant for this very moment. A safeguard hidden inside the trust. Mark has no idea but his threats tonight. They have sealed his own defeat. Her brow furrowed, her tears slowing. What do you mean? I took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. Your father worked with Mr. Park, his lawyer, before he died. He added a clause, a secret condition. The trust is worth $7 million, yes, but it only releases if both children agree. And if one of you is ever coerced, threatened, or pressured, then the entire fund passes to the one who resisted. Lily gasped, covering her mouth. You mean? Yes. I nodded, my voice steady. Mark's anger, his cruelty, his threat tonight, that was the key. He believes his words made him stronger, but in truth, they unlock the safeguard that strips him of everything. I recorded what he said. Tomorrow I'll hand it to Mr. Park. From that moment forward, the money will no longer be his weapon. It will be yours to protect, to use, to honor your father's wish. Lily broke into sobs again, but this time they were different. Not the sobs of despair, but of release. She clung to me like she had as a child, whispering through her tears. I thought I was alone. Mom, I thought you couldn't help me. But all this time, you were waiting. Yes, my darling, I whispered back, stroking her hair. I stayed silent because your father asked me to. Because justice doesn't need shouting. Sometimes it only needs patience. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain lashing against the windows, wind howling through the branches. Mark stomped down the hallway, his voice still muttering threats. But I no longer feared him. Every word he spoke was another nail in the coffin of his claim. That night, as I held Lily in my arms, I realized the truth. Revenge didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered quiet and patient, waiting for the exact moment to bloom. And tomorrow, justice would bloom. The morning of the meeting felt like the air before a storm, still heavy, waiting to crack open. Mark arrived at the lawyer's office in a tailored suit that didn't quite hide the tension in his jaw or the restless tapping of his foot. He brought his own attorney, a younger man in a sharp blue tie, who looked eager to prove himself. Lily walked in quietly behind me, pale but composed, her hands clasped as though she were holding herself together piece by piece. I sat down at the long mahogany table, my cardigan buttoned neatly, a folder in my lap. I said nothing. Mark broke the silence first. Mother, let's not drag this out any longer. We all know this fund was meant to be used, not to sit locked away gathering dust. Lily finally needs to face reality. We signed today, and everything moves forward. His lawyer leaned forward, sliding a stack of documents across the polished surface. This is the consent form required to authorize distribution from the trust. With both signatures, the $7 million can be liquidated and divided. I didn't move. Lily didn't reach for the pen. Mark's smile tightened, frustration flashing in his eyes. Lily, don't be ridiculous. This is your chance to make something of your life. Dad would want us to use the money, not keep it trapped. Lily whispered, barely audible. Dad would want us to honor each other. Mark's fist hit the table. Honor doesn't pay bills. The outburst echoed through the room, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached calmly into my folder and pulled out a single envelope. Thick, cream-colored, sealed with the stamp of Attorney Park's office. I placed it on the table with quiet precision, the sound louder than Mark's shouting. "What's this?" he sneered. I looked at Mr. Park, who had been waiting patiently at the far end of the table, his hands folded. Slowly, deliberately, he broke the seal and unfolded the pages. His voice was measured, deliberate, carrying the authority of the man who had drafted the trust with my late husband. This, he said, is a codicil, an amendment your father made to the trust before his death. It was kept confidential until the conditions required its unveiling. I will read it now. Mark shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Mr. Park's voice was steady as he began. In the event that either beneficiary of the Morales family trust engages in coercion, intimidation, or threats against the other, that party shall be deemed immediately disqualified from any share of the trust. The full amount without reduction shall transfer to the remaining beneficiary. The words dropped into the room like stones into deep water. For a moment, there was silence, so thick I could hear Lily's breath catch Mark's pulse hammering in his neck. Then Mark erupted. "This is a trick, a manipulation. He never would have done that. You forged this, mister." Park lifted his gaze calmly. "I was your father's lawyer for 30 years. I drafted this amendment with him personally in his study 6 months before his passing. I notarized it myself. The codicil is fully legal, fully binding, and was filed with the state registry. There is no question of its validity." Mark's face twisted. His voice cracked into fury. "Even if that's true, you can't prove I threatened her. You can't prove anything. That was the moment I had been waiting for." Slowly, I reached into my bag and set a small recorder on the table. My fingers pressed play. The room filled with his voice, raw and venomous, recorded just days earlier. "If you don't sign, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." The sound echoed in the office louder, crueler than when he had first shouted it in our kitchen. His own words undeniable damning. Mark's face drained of color. His lawyer froze, the confidence melting from his posture. As the recording continued, every syllable a nail in Mark's coffin. Lily sat, rigid, tears in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of release. When the recording ended, silence followed again. This time, it was the silence of judgment. Mr. Park folded his hands. "The evidence is clear. By the codicil, Mark Morales, you are disqualified from this trust. The entire $7 million transfers immediately to your sister, Lily Morales. The court will be notified today. Escrow arrangements and any attempted transactions in your name are hereby void." Mark's lawyer stammered. This can't. There must be an appeal process, a way to—" "There is no appeal," Mr. Park interrupted firmly. "The codicil was designed to be absolute. Your client triggered the clause himself. The law is clear." Mark sat back, his bravado crumbling. The shift was visible, brutal, from anger to disbelief, to panic, to something hollow. His hands trembled, his lips parted, but no words came. The man who had roared threats just days ago now looked small, cornered, broken. Finally, he whispered, "You planned this. You all planned this against me." I met his eyes, my voice calm, colder than ice. "No, Mark. Your father planned this to protect what mattered most. I simply waited for you to show who you truly were." His lawyer tried to gather the papers, muttering about procedures, but the meeting was already over. Mark's empire of control had collapsed in a single moment. He stood shakily, his chair scraping against the floor. "This isn't over," he muttered, though the words carried no weight anymore. His shoulders hunched, his swagger gone. He walked out of the room, a man stripped bare. Lily sat, frozen tears streaming silently down her face. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. "Do you see now?" I whispered. "Your father didn't leave you helpless. He left you the truth, and the truth has protected you." She nodded, unable to speak, her fingers gripping mine with the strength of someone finally freed. As the rain began to fall outside, I knew the fight was over. Mark had lost not because I shouted, not because I struck back, but because his own greed had undone him. The $7 million was secure. Lily was safe. And just as quiet, patient, inevitable had bloomed at last. Lily collapsed into my arms the moment the office doors closed behind Mark. For weeks, she had carried the weight of fear on her shoulders, her brothers shouting the constant threats, the shadows that seemed to follow her. Now, as she sobbed into my cardigan, all of it poured out: the sleepless nights, the knot of dread in her stomach, the guilt of wondering if she had somehow failed as a sister. I stroked her hair gently. "Shh. It's over now, my dear. You're safe. Your father made sure of it." Her tears slowed, but she clung to me as though letting go might bring the nightmare back. I felt the fragile bones of her shoulders, under my hands, and I thought of the little girl who once played barefoot in our backyard, who pressed lemon blossoms from our tree into my palms and asked me if heaven smelled like that. That girl was still inside her, and she had survived. For the first time in years, the air in our home felt breathable again. No more slammed doors. No more footsteps pacing in anger. No more threats whispered like poison through the walls. Mark had vanished from our lives as suddenly as he had tried to dominate them. He stopped calling. He stopped writing. Friends told me he had moved to another city, chasing another doomed business deal, but I didn't ask for details. He had made his choice. What remained was only the echo of regret, a hollow sound that did not belong in our home anymore. I knew some would say I was cruel, that I had set a trap for my own son. But cruelty is forcing your sister to sign away her future under the shadow of fear. Cruelty is making your mother watch in silence while greed eats her family alive. What I had done was not cruelty. It was justice carefully planted by Thomas years ago, left in the soil of our lives like a seed. All I had to do was wait for it to bloom. One evening, a week after the hearing, Lily walked into the living room with the old sheet music her father loved most, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. She hadn't touched the piano in months, not since Mark's rage had made even music feel unsafe. She sat down, her back straight, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the keys. I watched from my chair, my knitting resting idly in my lap. Then she began to play. The first notes were soft, uncertain, like a child, taking her first steps again. But soon, the melody filled the room, low, steady, flowing like water through the cracks of our wounds. The piano, once a silent witness to our family's unraveling, was alive again. The house breathed with it. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I could almost see Thomas leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, that proud little smile on his lips. He had always said music was the heartbeat of a home, and now, thanks to him, our home was beating again. When Lily finished, she turned to me, her eyes shining. "Do you think Dad would be proud of me, Mom?" I took her hand. "He already is, sweetheart." Every note you played tonight was his answer. I thought of Mark then, not with anger, but with a strange kind of sorrow. He had been given the same roof, the same love, the same lessons. Yet greed had deafened him to all of it. He had chosen to see only numbers, not memories, only profit, not people. In chasing $7 million, he had lost something far greater, his family, but I had no hatred left for him. Hatred is heavy, and I was too old, too tired to carry anything so useless. As I watched Lily's fingers rest gently on the keys, I finally spoke aloud the truth I had carried inside of me all this time. Revenge is not always taken with knives or raised voices. Sometimes it is a quiet clause written years before. Sometimes it is silence in the face of threats. And sometimes it is simply holding on until greed destroys itself. Lily leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and together we listened to the echoes of the sonata fading into the walls of our home. The trust fund was secure. The house was safe. And though we had lost a son and a brother to his own ambition, we had reclaimed something more precious, peace. The lemon tree outside bloomed again that spring. Its blossoms carried the same fragrance Lily had once asked about, the scent of heaven. And for the first time in a long time, I could answer her question. "Yes, my darling, heaven smells like this. And tonight it sounds like your music." I've replayed those days in my mind more times than I can count. The shouting, the fear in Lily's eyes, the anger in Mark's voice, and the silence in my own chest. Many would call it weakness to sit still and wait while my children fought over money. But I know now, silence was my weapon. I did not win because I hated. I won because my husband had planted a seed of justice long before the storm came. Thomas knew the danger. He knew that money can turn blood into strangers. He knew that love can be buried under numbers on a page. And so he gave me something that was stronger than anger, patience, and a plan. When the court announced that the entire trust would pass to Lily, my heart did not leap with joy. It ached, because no mother celebrates the fall of her own son. But I understood this was not my revenge. It was the law of consequence written into the very bones of the trust. Mark had chosen threats over love. He had chosen control over kindness. And the price of that choice was everything. I have asked myself 1,000 times, where did I go wrong with Mark? Did I spoil him? Did I fail to teach him gratitude? Or was it simply that his heart, so different from his sister's, could not see the value of memory of belonging of a lemon tree that has stood in our yard for 40 years? Perhaps I will never know. But what I do know is this greed is a mirror. It shows us who we are when we think no one is watching. For Lily, money was never the goal. She would have been content with nothing more than the old piano and her father's sheet music. She wanted the walls, the scent, the echo of laughter that still lingered in these rooms. She wanted the home, not the house. She wanted memory, not money. And that was why in the end, she was the one chosen. I sit sometimes in the living room, looking at the codicil Thomas left behind, and I wonder, did he know it would play out this way? Did he see Mark's hunger growing even while he was alive? Or did he simply prepare for the possibility, trusting that one day the truth of his children's hearts would be revealed? What strikes me most is how quiet justice can be. It did not come in the form of shouting or handcuffs. It came in the sound of a page turning in the voice of a lawyer reading aloud a single sentence. It came in the silence after Mark's own threats betrayed him. It came in Lily's tears, not of fear anymore, but of release. I think of all the families torn apart by inheritance of brothers who no longer speak of sisters who sue each other in court. Money can build walls thicker than any brick, higher than any fence. But money can also be the torch that burns away the illusions we hide behind. That $7 million did not make us rich. It revealed who we already were. And what did it reveal? That Mark was willing to sacrifice his sister for power. That Lily was willing to sacrifice money for peace. And that I, their mother, was willing to sit in silence bearing the pain so that the truth could bloom at the right time. Sometimes revenge is not a blade drawn in anger. Sometimes it is the steady hand that refuses to tremble, the heart that refuses to rush. I did not need to scream at Mark. I did not need to fight him in the open. All I needed was to remember Thomas's words. When the day comes, let justice grow on its own. Now, when I walk past the lemon tree outside, I see blossoms falling like small blessings. I hear Lily's music from the piano, her fingers dancing across the keys her father once touched. And I feel peace, because even though one child has turned away, another has turned toward the light. The world may measure value in dollars, but I measure it in memory, in the smell of the old wood, in the warmth of sunlight, on the floorboards, in the laughter of children long grown. This house is worth $7 million on paper, but to me, it is priceless. And now, thanks to Thomas's foresight, it will remain in the hands of the one who understands its true worth. Family revenge stories often end in fire and fury, but mine ends in silence and patience. And perhaps that is the truest victory of all, because revenge at its heart is not about destruction. It is about revelation. It is about forcing the world to see what lies beneath the mask. Mark wore the mask of a son, of a brother, of a businessman. But the mask cracked, and behind it was only hunger. Lily wore the mask of fragility, but beneath it was strength, compassion, and love. And me, I wore the mask of silence. And within that silence was the only power I ever needed. So I say again, not to Mark, not even to Lily, but to myself, I did not win because I hated. I won because my husband had sown justice long before, and because I had the patience to let it bloom. Mark thought he was clever. He thought threats, pressure, and control could bend his sister and break me. But the truth is, it wasn't my voice that defeated him. It wasn't even Lily's resistance. It was his own greed that carved the final sentence against him. As I sat in that quiet room, listening to the lawyer's voice read the codicil, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes justice does not need a hammer or a shout. Sometimes it writes itself in silence and in patience. Mark believed he could manipulate paper signatures in fear. But what he didn't understand was that money has no loyalty. $7 million can be either a bridge or a weapon. And in his hands, it became a mirror showing the world exactly who he was. Lily, gentle and patient, was never fighting for wealth. She fought for memory, for the house, for the piano keys that still carried her father's touch. And that was why she was chosen even before the court declared it. Because the trust was never really about money. It was about truth. I watched my son crumble that day. From arrogance to shock, from rage to silence. And even though a part of me, the mother in me, wanted to reach out and hold him, I couldn't. Because this was the price he had written for himself. Revenge in this story was not an explosion. It was a slow unveiling, a quiet reckoning. And in the end, the silence weighed heavier than any scream. So I ask you, the one listening now, if it were you standing where I stood, would you choose money? Or would you choose peace in your heart? Would you hold on to millions? Or would you hold on to memory? Mark thought he had won until the very moment his own words betrayed him. And I, who said almost nothing, carried the only weapon that mattered: patience and the truth my husband left behind. This is not just my story. It is one of many family revenge stories, where betrayal, greed, and silence collide, and where love and memory find a way to survive. Now I turn to you. Share your thoughts. Tell me what you would have done had you been in my place. And remember, follow Family Stories collection to hear more family revenge stories filled with betrayal twists and the kind of justice that no one can escape. Because sometimes revenge doesn't roar, it whispers.